Representative Rowe.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. Certainly this is a difficult and important debate that we're having this afternoon and this evening. And I think there are compelling arguments that we've heard on both sides. To me, the goodness and perhaps worth of a society ought to be judged, at least in part, upon how we treat humanity and how we treat our fellow man. Perhaps conversely, or on the other hand, it seems that there's an innate justice of sort in punishing the worst among us by ending their lives, by taking the serial murderers and the rapists and those who have, beyond a reasonable doubt, been judged to have committed the worst of the worst offenses that can be committed. Natural law argues that those lives may be forfeited. Traditional theology has taught that the civil state does have the right to punish with the ultimate punishment, the death penalty. It must be used judiciously and appropriately, but there has been always that recognition that that right for the civil authority does exist. However, in Connecticut, the death penalty as it now operates is often obtuse, it's clumsy, and really seems unworkable in so many cases. I think that the amendment that we voted down earlier, the Labrioli amendment, would have been a step in the direction of creating a workable death penalty, and one that serves the ends of justice much better than that which we now have. And as we debate, and we seem to debate this every few years, the weighty matter of the death penalty, I confess to being a bit curious as to why we seem to bring up the death penalty each year, or each few years, when the death penalty results in what? The execution once every 40 years is pretty much how it's come out this century, of an affirmed, beyond, not a reasonable doubt, beyond any doubt, killer. So we debate repeatedly, or at least frequently, whether or not we ought to do away with that. Again, do away with punishing the worst of the worst among us, the confirmed killers, that we only execute anyway once every 40 years. At the same time, and perhaps one of the reasons we're having this debate is because we as a state want to value human life. And there may be no more noble cause than valuing and protecting human life. That leads me to the inescapable question of what about the 40 lives that are sanctioned to be taken by the state every day in Connecticut, the lives of the unborn? And can't we have some sort of debate or recognition that those lives deserve something? They deserve a debate, they deserve a public hearing, they deserve the right to be heard because they can't be heard. And it's unfortunate because year after year after year after year, this is my 11th year, we have, and not just me but others, bring up in the public hearing process bills related to abortion, not seeking to abolish it. that would be unconstitutional at this point, but seeking to have some parameters around it, seeking some modest, minimal protections for the unborn, for the most vulnerable. What is more vulnerable than an unborn human life? They can't speak for themselves, they can't advocate for themselves, and we can't debate it here. And yet, we can debate whether or not the state ought to take the lives of the worst among us. And I don't say it glibly, it may sound that way, but I would be happy to eliminate the death penalty in this state if this body would simply take a few, even modest measures to preserve or at least give some due process to the rights of the unborn. I have an amendment drafted, which is germane, which would simply be a very modest way to allow girls under the age of 18 seeking an abortion simply to have to notify an adult. There's a judicial bypass mechanism, and it's clearly constitutional, and it is but an infinitesimally small step in this direction. But that's a debate that we're not going to have tonight. I do hope we can have it in the future. The unborn deserve it. Those on death row and those that have been convicted of the terrible crimes for which they're sentenced to die and for which we take the life of one every 40 years, they deserve this debate. And I dare say they deserve this debate maybe even annually. But goodness, the 40 unborn that are taken every day in this state, they deserve something, and they're not getting anything from this legislature, which is so unfortunate. I thank the Speaker for the latitude, and I will not be calling the amendment. And I do associate myself with some of Representative Lawler's remarks in that the death penalty is justice. It innately is justice. Unfortunately, the death penalty as we have it in Connecticut does not serve those ends of justice, or at least it serves them so imperfectly that it's appropriate that we look at this as we have been doing. So I appreciate the body's time. I do hope that we can pay a little more attention to the needs and the lives of the most innocent and the most vulnerable among us, because ultimately we as a society ought to be judged on how we protect those lives. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.